You're nothing but trouble, Jasmine. The words dripped off Donald Trump's tongue like oil on water, meant to humiliate, meant to put her in her place. But what he didn't know was that trouble was exactly what Jasmine Crockett came here to deliver. In the next 19 seconds, more than 40 million Americans would watch her turn a Capitol Hill hearing into the kind of political earthquake you can't unhear. One photograph, one vanished deportation order, and one name, Carolyn Trump, would send shockwaves through every living room in the country. By the time Jasmine finished, the insult that cracked the silence would crack his armor wide open. The air in the chamber was thick enough to touch. Every breath weighted with the knowledge that something irreversible was about to happen. Cameras tracked her like predators in perfect sync, their lenses darting to every flicker of expression, every shift in her posture. Then the scene widened, cutting to the restless faces of the committee members. A row of sharpened eyes, some fixed on Jasmine, others darting to Trump as if measuring how deep the blade had already gone. The shot rolled seamlessly into the press gallery. Journalists sat hunched over glowing laptops, fingers ready to trap history in real time. A few didn't even blink, afraid the truth might slip past them in the space between keystrokes. Outside, the camera panned across a roaring sea of protesters pressing against the barricades. Cardboard signs dripped in the rain, their messages bold in thick black paint. One law for all, she could be yours. Their voices bled through even the chamber's insulated walls, a low, constant rumble like distant thunder before a storm. The narrator's voice cut in, measured, deliberate, each word shaped to hold the room's pulse. 19 seconds, enough to shake the nation. The double doors at the rear of the hearing room creaked open, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Jasmine Crockett stepped through, her stride slow but unyielding, the kind of walk that said she wasn't here to participate. She was here to command. In her hand, she carried not the familiar gray folder the nation had seen in countless hearings, but a black envelope sealed with crimson wax. The seal glistened under the lights, the red catching like fresh blood against the envelope's matte darkness. It was the kind of object that made you wonder if you wanted to see what was inside, because once you did, you could never pretend you hadn't. Her heels struck the marble with a rhythm that filled the silence between camera clicks. Every step sounded like an unspoken countdown. Trump sat at the far end of the table, leaning back in his chair with the smug ease of a man who thought he'd already read the ending of the story. His tie, a defiant slash of red, hung like a warning flag across the neutral tones of the chamber. On either side, his attorneys sat like carved statues, their expressions frozen, but their eyes betraying the darting vigilance of men calculating threats. Jasmine didn't look at them. She didn't look at the committee or the rows of press. Her gaze locked on Trump from the moment she entered, and she never broke it. The black envelope rested against her fingers, like it belonged there, as much a part of her as her own pulse. She reached the table, placed the envelope carefully in front of her, and only then let her eyes sweep the room. The committee, the press gallery, the silent protest signs clutched in the back rows. It was a slow, deliberate claiming of the space, an assertion that this was now her ground, no matter who else thought they owned it. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but clear, each syllable slicing the air cleanly. "Your secret daughter will not be safe this time." The words detonated without raising her tone. Gasps erupted from the gallery, echoing off marble and wood. The rapid-fire click of camera shutters turned into a steady roar as photographers leaned forward, desperate to capture the microsecond shift in Trump's expression. It was there, so fast you could miss it if you blinked, the twitch at the corner of his jaw, the split-second flicker in his eyes. He straightened, smoothing his tie in a gesture meant to look casual, but too practiced to be unconscious. Jasmine didn't blink. The envelope sat between them like a live grenade. Trump's lips curved into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, his voice sliding into the microphone like oil over water. "Congresswoman," he said, "you've always been good at making noise." Jasmine's reply was immediate, her tone still calm, almost conversational. "And you've always been good at hiding behind it." The room went quieter still, if such a thing was possible. Somewhere in the second row, a pen dropped and rolled across the floor, its soft rattle impossibly loud against the marble. The narrator's voice returned, threading the moment into something larger than the scene itself. This isn't just a hearing. This is the sound of a fault line shifting. The camera lingered on the wax seal, zooming close enough to see the faint impression of the emblem pressed into it. Then it cut to Trump's hand, the fingers tightening fractionally against the polished wood of the desk. The image was broadcast into living rooms and phone screens across the country, where millions sat leaning forward, their own breaths matched to the pace of the room. Jasmine's hands rested lightly over the envelope now, not gripping, not clutching, just there, as if the weight of the truth inside was more than enough to keep it in place. Outside, the chants grew louder, the syllables sharp and defiant. Not above the law. Inside, the words hung between them, charged and irreversible. The seconds stretched, the kind of seconds that feel longer than minutes. Trump's smirk twitched again. Jasmine leaned forward, elbows brushing the edge of the table. In the stillness, her voice carried like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. You thought this was just another game, Mr. Trump, but games end. And when this one does, she let the unfinished sentence dangle, the silence around it deafening. The black envelope gleamed under the lights, and for the first time, the man who had built a career on control looked like he was wondering how much longer he could keep it. The cameras sensed it instantly, their lenses tightening in a slow, deliberate zoom, hunting for every tremor, every betraying flicker. They found their mark not on Trump, but on the man to his right, his lead attorney, a figure infamous for his stone-faced calm under fire. The lights caught the fine sheen forming along the attorney's hairline, a bead of sweat breaking free and tracing a slow path down his temple. It glistened like a signal, a silent Morse code for those who knew how to read weakness. The director in the broadcast control room didn't miss it. He switched the feed to a close-up, broadcasting the moment into millions of living rooms across the nation. Viewers saw it as if they were seated in the chamber, breathing the same charged air. Somewhere behind them, the faint scrape of a chair leg tore through the silence. It was not loud, but in a room like this, it was seismic. Heads turned sharply toward the source, a staffer shifting in their seat, pale-faced as the sound echoed like a misstep in a cathedral. And just as quickly, all attention snapped back to the long table at the front, to the black envelope between Jasmine, Crockett, and Donald Trump. In the control rooms of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, producers moved in sync, issuing the same command without speaking. Change the headline. The bland, neutral ticker reading Immigration Policy Hearing, live dissolved, replaced by bold white letters on a red strip. Hearing turns explosive. The change rippled outward like a shockwave. In diners, office break rooms, and airport lounges, eyes drifted to the nearest TV. People leaned in. Phones buzzed with messages. Turn on the hearing. Now. Inside the chamber, the shift was tangible. Committee members who had been leaning back with the practiced disinterest of career politicians now tilted forward, hands folded, eyes locked. Even those known to side with Trump appeared drawn toward the envelope, as if it carried its own gravity. In the press gallery, the mood changed from casual coverage to battlefield readiness. Notepads filled with frantic handwriting, camera shutters fired in bursts, each click a bullet in the war for tomorrow's front page. Security officers along the wall adjusted their stance, eyes scanning the crowd like they were bracing for the next move. Trump broke the stillness with a tiny movement, rolling his shoulders back, his suit jacket shifting like armor, settling into place. He reached for a pen, spinning it once between his fingers before letting it tap against the table in a slow, steady rhythm. It was the kind of motion designed to say, "I'm still in control." But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her hands remained on the envelope, fingertips resting lightly as though she were touching a live wire without fear. The contrast was almost cinematic. On one side of the screen, restless motion. On the other, unshakable stillness. A veteran photographer recognized the symmetry instantly, leaning over the press rail to frame the shot that would live beyond this moment. Through his lens, he caught the red of Trump's tie, the black of the envelope, the wax seal glowing like a drop of blood under the lights. Somewhere beyond the thick stone walls, the protesters' voices began to seep into the chamber. At first, it was only a faint murmur, a sound you might mistake for the hum of the air system. Then the words became clear, 4 syllables, over and over, in a rhythm that felt ancient and unstoppable. not above the law. Each repetition seemed to sync with the pounding of hearts inside. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver, but the corner of her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly, as though she were acknowledging the chorus outside without giving Trump the satisfaction of a glance. He, however, shifted in his chair, the pen stalling mid-tap. His jaw worked once, twice, as if chewing on words he wasn't ready to release. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something too low for the microphones, and the man nodded quickly, eyes flicking to the envelope as though it might detonate. The television broadcast split the feed. Jasmine on the left, Trump on the right. The juxtaposition was brutal, her calm, anchored focus against his restless, shifting energy. It was a chess match playing out in body language. Online, hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Inesha black envelope. Inesha hearing turns explosive. Not above the law. Clips from the live feed flooded Twitter and Facebook, each one captioned with theories, accusations, and predictions. But in the chamber, the stakes felt heavier than trending tags. Everyone present seemed to understand, even if they wouldn't say it aloud. This was a tipping point. A single sentence, a single flick of Jasmine's wrist to break that seal, could shift the ground under every person in the room. Trump knew it too. The pen was gone now, set carefully on the desk as both his hands folded together. The skin over his knuckles whitened. Jasmine noticed. Her eyes narrowed by a fraction, the movement small enough to miss if you weren't looking for it. The envelope between them might as well have been a loaded weapon, its danger heightened by the fact that it remained untouched. Somewhere in the back of the room, a clock ticked, a faint metronomic pulse that seemed to grow louder with each beat. The narrator's voice slipped into the moment, low and deliberate. Every empire falls the same way, not with a scream, but with the sound of one truth slipping past the guards. The camera obeyed the voice, zooming in on Jasmine's face, her gaze locked and steady before shifting to the seal, unbroken, yet carrying the weight of inevitability. Then it panned back to Trump, whose eyes betrayed the tiniest flicker of something the cameras rarely caught in him. Not anger, not defiance, something closer to anticipation's darker cousin, dread. The seconds stretched until the hearing room no longer felt like a seat of government, but an arena where every breath, every blink, might decide who would walk out victorious. And as the envelope remained in place, the question hanging in the air was no longer if Jasmine would open it. It was when. She let the silence linger just long enough to make the anticipation ache, her fingers still resting lightly on the black envelope, as if she could feel the heartbeat of the room through its surface. Then, without breaking her gaze from Trump, she spoke. "A name," she said slowly, each word deliberate, "that disappeared from history." The words didn't shout, but they struck like a thunderclap. The gallery erupted in a staccato of camera shutters, each flash slicing the air with bursts of white light that fractured the faces in the room into stark, frozen moments. The chaos wasn't loud, it was sharp, piercing. It was the sound of controlled panic trying to stay contained. Committee members shifted in their seats, but it wasn't the casual fidget of long hearings. This was tighter, more deliberate. Two members leaned toward each other, speaking in whispers barely visible behind the raised folders they used as cover. Their eyes weren't on Jasmine. They were on Trump. One of them darted a quick glance at the envelope before looking away, his jaw tightening, his fingers drumming once against the desk before stilling. It was the body language of someone who already knew more than they should. Jasmine didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. The power in her words was doing the work, pulling every mind in the room toward the same unspoken question. Whose name? Trump sat motionless, but there was a new rigidity in his posture, like every muscle was holding a defensive line. His attorneys exchanged a fleeting glance, quick, clipped, but not quick enough to escape the unforgiving eye of the cameras. The broadcast feed caught it, replayed it, and sent it into homes where viewers were already leaning forward, pulses quickening. Outside the chamber, the protesters' chants swelled, as if they could sense the shift through the stone walls. Not above the law. Inside, Jasmine leaned back slightly, her tone calm but edged with steel. This name, she continued, did not fade because time forgot it. It was removed. Gas whispered through the gallery like a draft in an old cathedral. A reporter in the second row pressed her phone harder to her ear, murmuring into it while her other hand typed furiously. The glow of her laptop reflecting off her glasses. The sound of cameras intensified, a frenzy of mechanical clicks punctuated by the occasional flash that made the polished wood and marble gleam like stage props in a theater of truth. Jasmine let her gaze drift, slowly, deliberately, across the committee table, pausing just long enough on each face to make them wonder if she knew their part in this story. Some avoided her eyes entirely. Others held her look for a second too long, the challenge in their gaze thinly masking the unease beneath. She stopped when she reached Trump. His smirk was gone now, replaced by a tight, controlled expression that didn't quite manage to hide the flicker of irritation in his eyes. Her voice dropped, intimate enough that even those at the far end of the chamber leaned forward to catch it. "When history is rewritten," she said, "there's always someone holding the pen." The words seemed to echo, not because she spoke them loudly, but because the room had gone so still that every syllable traveled farther. In the gallery, a veteran political reporter set down his pen, his focus narrowing entirely to the scene unfolding before him. He knew this wasn't the kind of testimony you summarized later. This was the kind you remembered word for word. Jasmine didn't move her hands from the envelope, but with a subtle shift, she angled it so the light caught the wax seal, making it impossible for the cameras not to notice it glinting like a challenge. The image was instantly captured and broadcast, split across the screen with Trump's face on the other side. A man sitting perfectly still, yet visibly bracing. From the corner of the room, the faint sound of a security radio crackled and then fell silent again, like even the guards were unwilling to break the spell. Jasmine took a measured breath, letting it fill the microphone before she spoke again. "There are some names," she said, "that disappear from public record only when someone has the power to make it happen." The line landed like a blade sliding between armor plates, not shouted, not embellished, just undeniable. Trump's lead attorney leaned forward, whispering something that didn't reach the mics. But the camera caught the tension in his jaw, the quick tap of his index finger against the desk, a tick of restrained urgency. Jasmine didn't acknowledge the movement. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, enough to close the distance between her and the microphone without touching it. "When a name vanishes," she said softly, "you have to ask who benefits from its absence." The silence that followed was thick, as if the room itself was holding its breath. A committee member shifted papers unnecessarily, the faint rustle loud in the absence of other sounds. The protesters outside roared again, their chant overlapping with the heartbeat rhythm of camera shutters. Jasmine's gaze swept the room one final time before settling back on Trump. Her voice, now steady and cold, cut through the chaos with surgical precision. "And this name," she said, "wasn't erased by accident." The flash bulbs erupted again, their bursts like lightning in the chamber. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter whispered, almost to herself, "She knows." And in that moment, it didn't matter whether the envelope was opened yet. The damage was already bleeding into the air. The chairwoman's gavel struck once, sharp and clean, calling the next witness. From the back of the room, a figure began to move. Steady, deliberate steps, echoing in the hush, like the tick of a clock no one could stop. Karen Ellis emerged from the aisle, her shoulders squared, her posture almost military in its precision. Around her neck, on a simple silver chain, hung a small black USB drive. It swung lightly with each step, catching the light in brief, sharp flashes, tiny glints that made more than one camera operator tighten their zoom. She stopped at the witness table, unclasped the chain, and placed the drive on the wood in front of her. Her voice when she spoke was low, but carried an edge of resolve. "This," she said, resting a fingertip on the USB, "contains information I've never released before today." A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery, chased by the click and flash of cameras. In the second row, a journalist mouthed something to a colleague. Two words that the microphones didn't catch but the tension made obvious. Game changer. Karen adjusted the microphone, her hands steady but her eyes revealed the weight she carried. She didn't look at Trump. She didn't even glance at Jasmine. Her gaze fixed straight ahead, as if replaying something she had seen too many times to forget. "It was late," she began. "After midnight. My team and I were executing a high-priority removal order. The room leaned in. She didn't rush, letting each phrase breathe, the pauses painting the spaces between the images. The hallways were narrow, she continued. Old dormitory building, tile floors, every step we took echoed off the walls. She glanced down briefly, inhaling before she went on. There was crying, not loud at first, just muffled sobs behind a door at the end of the hall. The words seemed to coat the air with a chill. Even those who had heard hundreds of testimonies felt the shift. You could hear her breathing through the crack, Karen said, her voice flattening into the cadence of memory. Quick, panicked, like she was trying not to make a sound but couldn't help it. The gallery was silent except for the faint hum of broadcast equipment. Trump's attorneys sat motionless, but one of them twitched a finger against his legal pad. Karen pressed on. We knocked. 3 times. Standard procedure. The knocks echoed so loud they sounded like they belonged to someone else's hands. She stopped just long enough for the room to feel the space between knocks. When she opened the door, Karen said, she was in pajama pants and a sweatshirt. She held her student ID like it could protect her. The image was so vivid that people in the gallery could almost see it. Plastic card trembling between 2 fingers, eyes wide and wet. She asked why we were there, Karen went on, but we had an order, signed, stamped, no questions allowed. A camera shutter snapped, the sound slicing through the air. We read the removal order, Karen said, her tone even but her jaw tightening. She went quiet, just quiet. That kind of quiet where you know the sound has been pulled right out of someone. Jasmine's eyes never left Karen. Trump leaned back in his chair, fingers laced together, his expression unreadable. Karen's voice dipped lower, forcing everyone to lean in to catch it. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just walked barefoot down the hallway, the sound of her steps sticking to the tile like it didn't want to let go. The audience could almost hear it, the soft slap of bare feet, the echo of agents' boots behind her. Halfway to the van, Karen continued, her roommate came running down the hall, crying, asking what was happening. We didn't answer. The lights above seemed harsher now, sharpening every detail of the scene she painted. She kept asking why. What did she do? Karen said. But we didn't know. All we had was the order. For a moment, Karen's voice caught, not breaking, but tightening. She sat in the van, Karen said, hands in her lap, staring at the floor. I remember the condensation on the windows from her breath. The room was utterly still. Then my radio crackled, Karen said. It was the voice from headquarters, tight, urgent. Stop transport. Release her immediately. Gasps broke the silence like glass shattering. Karen's hands spread flat on the table. In 15 years, I've never heard an order like that. No appeal, no paperwork, just gone. She let the words settle, heavy as lead. We walked her back, Karen said. She didn't ask questions. She didn't even look at us. She just went inside and closed the door. Trump's jaw twitched, his gaze fixed forward. Karen leaned in toward the microphone, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The next morning, her name was gone from the system. Not archived, not marked as canceled. Just erased, like it had never existed. Flashbulbs went off again, painting the chamber in harsh bursts of white. Karen tapped the USB drive once, the sound sharp in the quiet. This, she said, is everything I have from that night. Audio, logs, the order itself, and the moment it disappeared. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the chain still coiled on the table. Trump's attorney reached for his microphone but stopped when Trump lifted one finger. Small, deliberate, commanding silence. Karen's final words landed like a weight no one could move. Someone with power made that name disappear, she said, and they wanted no record it was ever there. The cameras swung back to Jasmine. She hadn't moved, but her gaze was locked, unblinking, on the man across the table. The envelope between them was still sealed, but now there was something else in the room, something heavier than the truth itself. The knowledge that, when it came, the truth would already have a voice to carry it. Jasmine didn't move toward the envelope. Instead, she reached for a slim remote lying beside her notes, her fingers curling around it with the same care someone might take holding a match in a room soaked with gasoline. She pressed a single button. The chamber lights dimmed slightly, and the large monitor behind the committee table flickered to life. At first, the screen was black. Then an image appeared, grainy at the edges but crystal clear at its center. Donald Trump, younger, smiling in a way that wasn't his public, rally stage grin. Beside him, a teenage girl. Her dark hair caught the light, and her eyes, those eyes, were unmistakable. The exact same almond shape, the same deep-set intensity. It was a mirror in female form. The air in the room seemed to shift on its axis. You could feel the recognition ripple through it like an electric current, a collective intake of breath that never fully exhaled. The camera operators knew their cue. They swung their lenses away from the image and began sweeping the faces in the chamber, capturing reaction after reaction like a string of confessionals. One committee member's lips parted slightly, as though a silent "oh" had escaped before they could stop it. Another blinked hard, their eyes darting from the photo to Trump, then back to the screen as if trying to confirm the resemblance with each pass. In the gallery, a reporter dropped her pen, the faint clatter bouncing once on the floor before rolling under the bench. She didn't even reach for it. Her gaze was fixed on the screen. Closer to the front, Trump's lead attorney leaned back ever so slightly, his hand tightening around the armrest, knuckles whitening. Trump himself didn't look at the photo. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, the posture of a man refusing to give the moment oxygen. But the camera caught the smallest tell, the subtle tightening at the corners of his mouth, the faint shift in his jaw, as if he were grinding his teeth. Jasmine's voice broke the silence, calm and deliberate. "This photograph was taken at a private event," she said, "with fewer than 30 people in attendance." The image on the screen zoomed in slightly, tightening on the girl's face. Her expression was open, almost shy, but her proximity to Trump spoke of familiarity, not formality. "She's not listed in any official record from that night," Jasmine continued, "but she was there." The sound of rapid typing filled the gallery as journalists fought to capture every word. "This isn't a random guest," Jasmine said, her gaze sweeping across the committee. "This is someone connected, closely connected." The words hung heavy in the air, not yet naming the connection, but guiding the audience to it with surgical precision. On the broadcast feed, the screen split, half on the photograph, half on Trump's face. The contrast was brutal, one side frozen in time, the other straining to maintain control in the present. Outside, the protesters' chants faltered for just a moment, as if the collective attention had been pulled inside the walls. Then, as if reacting to what they couldn't yet see, the volume surged again. "Not above the law, not above the law." The photo stayed on the screen, unwavering, its stillness more confrontational than any spoken accusation. Jasmine didn't turn to look at it. She kept her eyes on Trump, letting the weight of the image work in the space between them. "This young woman," she said, "is not on any deportation list today." Hustum. The sentence was simple, but the implication was loaded, and the room felt it. Every camera in the chamber captured the micro-reactions, committee members exchanging sidelong glances, reporters leaning in, the faint, involuntary shake of someone's head in the second row. In the far corner, a photographer adjusted his lens, snapping a frame that captured Trump, the girl's image behind him, and Jasmine in the foreground. It was a visual indictment without a single word of legal argument. Jasmine paused, the silence stretching just enough to make people lean forward in their seats. "When the history of this night is written," she said finally, "this is the image they will use." Her tone wasn't boastful. It was matter-of-fact, the way someone might describe a natural disaster, inevitable, undeniable, recorded. The screen held on the girl's face a moment longer, as if to etch it into the minds of everyone present. Then with a click of the remote, the monitor went black. The darkness felt heavier than the image had. Jasmine placed the remote down slowly, her fingertips brushing it as though sealing the moment into the table itself. Trump shifted in his seat, and though the movement was small, it carried the weight of someone adjusting under a spotlight that had grown hotter by the second. Jasmine's eyes never left him. "Now," she said quietly, "you can tell the room you don't know her. You can tell America she's just another face in a photograph. But you and I both know that's not the truth." The silence after was like the pause before a verdict, and though no gavel had struck, The chamber already felt like it had been judged. Then, suddenly, Trump was on his feet. The scrape of his chair legs against the polished floor cut through the tension like a blade dragged across glass. He leaned forward, one palm flat on the table, the other balled into a fist. "This is a political hit job," he barked, the words ricocheting off the chamber walls. His voice carried the force of a man used to dominating a room, to bending the volume of his tone into a weapon. The sound was raw, unfiltered, a shout meant to rally allies, intimidate opponents, and drown out the image still burned into everyone's mind. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She remained seated, posture unbroken, hands resting lightly on the envelope before her. The stillness of her body was almost louder than his outburst, a deliberate refusal to match his volume. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze with the calm precision of a surgeon about to make the first cut. "The truth doesn't need to shout, Mr. Trump." The words landed softly, but in the chamber's hushed air, they felt heavier than a gavel strike. It wasn't defiance in her tone, it was certainty, the kind that couldn't be rattled by volume or bluster. Trump's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth as if to fire back, but something in the steadiness of her eyes made him pause for just half a second too long. That hesitation, caught by every camera in the room, was a wound in itself. Around them, the lights seemed to dim, not by mechanical adjustment, but by the sheer shift in focus. Every lens, every pair of eyes, locked onto the two of them. It was as if the rest of the chamber had fallen away, leaving only a ring, its ropes invisible, but its boundaries undeniable. The air between them was thick with the charge of 1,000 unspoken blows, each waiting for its moment to land. Trump straightened, his suit jacket settling over his frame like armor, and jabbed a finger toward Jasmine. "This is a disgrace," he said, voice low but dripping with accusation. "You've dragged my name, my family, and this country through the mud for your own gain." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, the faintest ghost of a smile touching her lips. Not amusement, but something colder. "If your name and your family can be undone by the truth," she replied, "then perhaps it's not the truth that's the problem." A murmur rippled through the gallery, the sound like wind stirring dry leaves. Trump took a step forward, closing the space between them by inches, his shadow spilling across the table. "You think you can win this with theatrics?" he said. Jasmine's eyes didn't move from his. "You mistake clarity for theater," she said. The room was silent again, the kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from everyone waiting for the next strike. In the press gallery, a veteran journalist scribbled a note. "This is no longer a hearing. This is a duel." Trump's hands gripped the table edge now, knuckles whitening under the pressure. "You have no proof," he growled. "Just innuendo. Just lies dressed up for television." Jasmine's voice was steady as she answered. "If it's all lies, Mr. Trump, then you should have nothing to fear from what's in this envelope." Her fingertips tapped it once, lightly, almost playfully, but the sound echoed like a starter pistol. Trump's eyes flicked to the envelope for the briefest moment, and the cameras caught it. The image would be replayed again and again, dissected frame by analysts across the country. The man who built his brand on control glancing, just once, at the thing that might end him. He pulled back, straightening his posture, trying to reassert the dominance he felt slipping. But the air had shifted. Jasmine remained motionless, her stillness a kind of force that didn't need to rise to meet his energy. It absorbed it. In that moment, the chamber no longer felt like a room governed by procedure. It felt like a ring where only two fighters mattered, circling each other without moving their feet. The audience, committee members, press, staffers, were no longer participants in governance but spectators at a match they knew would end with one of them on the floor. Trump's breathing had changed now, heavier, each inhale and exhale audible in the quiet. Jasmine's remained measured, as if she were pacing herself for the long rounds ahead. The chairwoman's gavel struck once, twice, but the tension didn't break. Even the sound of authority couldn't pull the room out of the invisible ring. Trump leaned closer again, lowering his voice just enough that only the nearest microphones caught it. "You have no idea what you're walking into." Jasmine's reply was instant. "I know exactly where I'm standing." The lights above seemed to press down, sharpening the shadows on their faces, etching the standoff into an image that felt carved in stone. Neither moved, neither blinked. And in that frozen moment, the line between politics and combat blurred until it vanished completely. A sudden shuffle of papers broke the tension. Not from the committee table, but from the press gallery. April Johnson, an investigative journalist whose bylines had become synonymous with political detonations, rose from her seat. She didn't ask for permission. Instead, she strode forward with the quiet authority of someone who knew the weight of what she carried. Under her arm was a thin folder, but in her right hand, she gripped a small wireless clicker. Without ceremony, she aimed it toward the massive monitor behind the committee table and pressed. The screen lit up instantly, replacing the black void left after Jasmine's photograph with a clean, sharp slide. At the top, in bold letters, were 3 words: "Follow the money." A collective murmur rippled through the chamber, but April didn't pause. Her voice was measured, clipped, every syllable aimed like a bullet. "This," she began, "is the documented path of funds tied to the events we've been hearing about today." The slide was a spiderweb of lines and arrows, money flowing from one account to another, crisscrossing state lines, jumping borders. She stepped closer to the monitor and clicked again. A highlighted circle appeared over the first node. Miami, FL, initial deposit. $250,000, April said. Transferred from a domestic PAC to a private holding account. No disclosure filed. Her finger hovered over the next arrow. From Miami, the funds were split into 3 transfers. One to Panama, one to Cyprus, and, she paused just enough to make the room lean forward, one to the Cayman Islands. She clicked again, and the arrow to the Cayman account glowed crimson. The words, "Offshore." Cayman Islands flashed in bright red letters beneath the transaction. The reaction was instantaneous. A low hum of voices swelled into a chorus of overlapping questions. Committee members shifted in their seats, some leaning in toward aides who were already typing furiously on laptops. From the gallery, camera shutters fired like machine gun bursts, each flash capturing the red highlighted words on the screen. April's voice cut through the noise, calm but unyielding. "This account," she said, "is registered under a shell corporation with no listed officers, no employees, and no physical address." She let that hang for half a beat before adding, "The same shell corporation appears in at least 4 other known corruption investigations, spanning 3 continents." Trump's attorney leaned toward him, whispering in rapid bursts, his eyes flicking between the screen and Jasmine, as though calculating the fallout in real time. Trump, for his part, remained still, too still. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on the glowing red words. April clicked again, and the slide zoomed in, revealing the exact date of the transfer. August 14, 2021. She circled it with the clicker, her movements crisp and deliberate. "This date," she said, "is significant for one reason. It is exactly 48 hours after the deportation order for the unnamed student was rescinded." The words landed like a hammer blow. Gasps cut through the air. Someone in the back row of the gallery muttered, "Jesus Christ," loud enough for the microphones to catch. April didn't react. She clicked to the next slide, where the Cayman account connected to yet another offshore node, this one in Zurich, Switzerland. From Zurich, the funds splintered again, disappearing into multiple small accounts across Europe and Asia. She drew a slow breath before speaking. "This is not random. This is not coincidence. This is the architecture of concealment." Her eyes swept the room, landing briefly on each committee member before locking on Trump. "And it doesn't happen without intent." The weight of the accusation wasn't in her tone. It was in the trail of numbers glowing on the screen, in the undeniable logic of the arrows and dates. The protesters outside seemed to sense the escalation. Their chants grew louder, their voices pushing through the stone walls until the rhythm of "not above the law" became an undercurrent to every breath in the room. Jasmine's gaze flicked from the monitor to Trump, watching for even the smallest reaction. She caught it, a fractional tightening of his eyes, the kind that could be missed if you weren't looking for it. April stepped back, the clicker dangling loosely in her hand now. "I'm submitting these documents to the committee," she said. "Every transfer, every timestamp, Every account number. She laid the folder on the witness table with deliberate care, as though placing an explosive that had yet to detonate. Trump finally broke his stillness, leaning back in his chair with a short, sharp exhale that might have been a laugh, or might have been something darker. April turned away from him, addressing the committee directly. "I don't deal in politics," and she said. "I deal in facts. And the facts are right here." The chairwoman's gavel struck once, but the room didn't return to order. The image of the Cayman transfer still burned on the screen, glowing red like a warning light that refused to fade. And in that charged silence, it was clear to everyone that the next move, whoever made it, would decide whether the arrows on that chart ended in a courtroom or in the shadows where they began. The decision came in the form of a soft click. Speakers mounted in the corners of the chamber crackled to life, the sound raw and unpolished, like air moving through an old tape recorder. A voice began to emerge, low at first, then gaining clarity. The timbre was unmistakable. Donald Trump. The audio had that intimate, unguarded quality of a conversation never meant to be heard by strangers. "Remove that name." "Objection!" Trump's lead attorney was on his feet before the sentence finished, his hand raised high like he was warding off a physical blow. "This recording must be stopped immediately," he said sharply. "National security concerns." The words were chosen with surgical precision, because in Washington, national security could slam shut more doors than any gavel. The murmurs that had been simmering in the room erupted into open chatter. Some committee members leaned toward each other, speaking in urgent undertones. Others froze entirely, eyes darting between the attorneys and the speakers. The chairwoman's brow furrowed. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge of warning. "Counselor, you will need to specify the nature of the threat to national security." The attorney didn't miss a beat. "I cannot disclose that in open session." It was the oldest trick in the book, and everyone in the room knew it. But knowing and proving were two different things. Before the tension could calcify, Jasmine spoke, her tone clipped but steady. "Madam Chair, we cannot allow national security to become a shield for personal embarrassment. The American people have a right to hear this in its entirety." The chairwoman hesitated for half a second, then nodded once. "Very well. We will put it to a vote." The vote was rapid fire, each aye or nay stacking into the record with a rhythm that felt almost percussive. Ayes carried. The attorney sat down slowly, his expression schooled into neutrality, but his fingers drumming once against his folder before stilling. "Resume playback," the chairwoman ordered. The recording continued without fanfare, but the atmosphere was taut enough to hum. "Remove that name?" There was a pause, small, but dense. Then the voice came again, lower, almost conspiratorial. "Now she's blood." The word detonated in the room. Not family, not relative. Blood. It had a weight, a primal resonance that bypassed politics and went straight to the marrow of human instinct. It was a word that closed the distance between people, that suggested not just connection, but inevitability. The gallery reacted instantly. Some gasped, others whispered fiercely to their neighbors, already parsing the implications. A reporter near the back mouthed the word silently, as if testing its shape. Blood. It was more than an admission. It was an inheritance. On the broadcast split screen, the reaction shots told the story better than any commentary. Jasmine sat still, but her eyes locked onto Trump's with a quiet intensity, like she'd just been handed the final puzzle piece she had been chasing for months. Trump, for his part, leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of practiced indifference, but the tightening of his jaw betrayed the strain. April Johnson was scribbling something in her notebook, underlining twice. One committee member actually closed their eyes for a moment, as though replaying the word in their mind, trying to decide whether it was confirmation or catastrophe. Jasmine finally broke the silence. "Mr. Trump," she said evenly, "would you like to clarify what you meant by 'she's blood'?" Her voice wasn't mocking, wasn't raised. It was a scalpel, sharp and precise. Trump didn't answer right away. The cameras caught the faintest flicker of movement in his throat as he swallowed once, slowly. When he did speak, his tone was measured, almost casual. "Figure of speech," he said, "means nothing." But no one in the room believed that. Not after the photograph, not after the deportation order, not after the money trail glowing red on the screen, and certainly not after hearing that word in his own voice. Blood. The chairwoman leaned forward. This committee will determine what it means, Mr. Trump, she said, but we will do so with the full context before us. The audio clicked off, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the sound itself had been. In that void, the word lingered, not just in the ears of those who heard it, but in the pit of their stomachs. Blood. It was the kind of word that didn't fade when the microphones turned off. It was the kind of word that traveled, and everyone in the room knew it would be echoing across the country before the day was over. The silence that followed felt as if the air itself had thickened. Even the shuffling of papers had stopped, as though every hand in the room feared breaking the moment. Then, from the witness table, came a sound no one expected. Soft at first, but uneven, jagged. Karen Ellis was crying, not the restrained, polite tears of a witness under pressure, but the raw, heaving sobs of someone whose dam had finally cracked. Her hands came up to cover her face, but her voice still found its way through, muffled yet aching with confession. I saved her because I was ordered to. The words stumbled out between breaths, each syllable trembling like it wanted to retreat but couldn't. But I couldn't save the others. The phrase landed in the chamber like a body hitting the ground. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was Karen's unsteady breathing and the faint creak of her chair as she leaned forward, elbows on the table, head bowed. From the gallery, the first quiet sob emerged, not from Karen, but from somewhere in the back rows. It spread slowly, like a ripple on water. A woman near the center pressed a tissue to her mouth. A man in the corner turned his face away, blinking hard. The sound of emotion was contagious, breaking the rigid decorum of the room. Jasmine's gaze softened, her hands loosening from the envelope she'd kept poised for so long. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. This was not her moment to lead. It belonged to Karen. Karen dropped her hands from her face, revealing eyes rimmed red and wet. Her voice shook, but it carried with startling clarity now, the words finding strength in the act of speaking them aloud. There were 7 of them, she said, looking down at the table as if afraid the memories might burn holes in the wood. All students, all scared. And I followed orders for 6. She exhaled sharply as though the truth itself was a weight leaving her chest. But that last one, I was told to stop, to take her back. Her eyes lifted then, scanning the committee table, searching for someone who might understand. I did what I was told, but the others, they're gone. The room didn't erupt with questions or accusations. It just breathed with her. Every person in it seemed to feel the scale of her guilt pressing down on their own shoulders. Trump sat perfectly still, but his eyes were on Karen now, sharp and narrow, as if calculating what her vulnerability might cost him. Karen's voice broke again, but she kept going. Each word wrestled from a place she hadn't dared visit in years. They called it routine. They called it protocol. Her fingers twisted together in her lap, knuckles paling. But I've seen routine. I've lived protocol. And this, she shook her head once, firmly. This was something else. One of the committee members leaned forward, their pen frozen above a legal pad. What do you mean, something else? They asked softly. Karen hesitated, swallowing hard. It wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about visas or status. Her gaze flicked toward Trump, and for a fleeting moment, the years of silence between them seemed to collapse. It was about erasing someone, completely, making sure they didn't exist. Not here, not anywhere. A low gasp rolled through the room again, not from shock at the words themselves, but from the implication that everyone now felt threading through the evidence already laid out. In the gallery, a young intern from one of the networks lowered her camera for the first time all afternoon. Her eyes were glassy, her hands still. Karen's final words came quieter, almost as if they were meant for herself more than anyone else. I couldn't save the others. Her chin trembled, but she didn't look away from Trump now. And I will never stop seeing their faces. The chairwoman's gavel struck once, not to silence the emotion, but to mark the gravity of the record. In that moment, the chamber didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a memorial. The evidence, the money trail, the damning audio, they all still mattered. But now layered on top was something that could not be cross-examined or dismissed. Loss. Loss that was personal, irreversible, and now finally public. The cameras inside the chamber caught the chairwoman calling a brief recess, but the live broadcast didn't fade to a logo or talking heads. Instead, the feed cut to the steps of the Capitol. Rain was falling in sheets, the kind that blurred edges and turned the streets into rivers, but no one outside was leaving. The crowd was a wall, shoulder to shoulder, drenched and unmoved. Their chants rose and fell with the rhythm of the storm, the thunder above punctuating their voices like nature itself had joined in the protest. Placards and handmade signs bobbed in the sea of umbrellas and ponchos. One was painted in bold red letters, "Blood is not above the law." Another, written in a shaky but determined hand, read, "She could be any of us." A woman in her 60s clutched that sign to her chest, the cardboard sagging under the weight of the rain, but she never loosened her grip. Nearby, a young man held his phone above his head, live streaming to an audience that had already crossed 500,000 viewers. His voice trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. "We're not leaving," he said into the camera. "Not until they know we heard every word." A chant began somewhere in the middle of the crowd and rippled outward, gathering volume until it became the dominant sound, rising above the drumming rain. "Blood is not above the law. Blood is not above the law." Inside, the muffled roar of it could be felt through the stone walls, vibrating faintly underfoot. Reporters in the gallery glanced at each other, realizing that whatever was happening beyond these walls was no longer just reaction, it was momentum. A producer from one of the networks leaned toward her anchor, whispering, "They're not going to let this die tomorrow." On the steps, a group of veterans in uniform stood in a tight formation, their boots darkened from the water, their eyes forward. One of them, a tall man with a Marine insignia on his cap, held his own sign, scrawled with a single word, "Accountability." The rain plastered it to the cardboard, the ink running like blood down the edges, but the word remained legible, defiant. The camera panned across faces, young, old, black, white, Latino, Asian. Every one of them framed in the same expression of stubborn resolve. An elderly man wrapped in a clear plastic poncho had his arm around a teenage girl. He whispered something to her, and though the microphones couldn't catch it, her lips moved to repeat the words, like she was committing them to memory. Lightning forked in the distance, illuminating the dome behind them for an instant, the whetstone gleaming like polished steel. A cheer went up, unplanned but unanimous, as if the flash had been some kind of signal. Back inside, the broadcast cut briefly to aerial footage, an ocean of umbrellas, rain-slick coats, and raised fists, stretching block after block in every direction. It looked less like a protest and more like a siege. In the control room, a producer shook his head. "They're not just here for politics," he said quietly to no one in particular. "They're here for something else." The storm outside raged on, soaking through clothes and cardboard alike, but the chants only grew sharper, more disciplined, each repetition hitting like a hammer on the same nail. She could be any of us. She could be any of us. Inside the chamber, even those who tried to tune it out couldn't. The sound was a living thing now, pressing against the walls, seeping into the hearing whether it was acknowledged or not. Karen Ellis, still at the witness table, turned her head slightly toward the muffled thunder of voices. Her lips moved, barely audible, but the cameras caught it. "They're still here." Jasmine heard it too. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second, not to shut the sound out, but to absorb it, draw strength from it. And when she opened them again, her focus was sharper than it had been all day. The storm might have been outside, but in that moment, it was clear. It was already in here too. Jasmine's hand moved deliberately toward the small remote on the table. No flourish, no announcement, just a click. The monitor at the front of the chamber faded from black to the dim glow of a single, stark image. A young woman, framed by shadow, sat in a darkened room. The only light came from a narrow beam falling across her face, catching the lines of her cheekbones, the tremor in her jaw, the set of her mouth. The name beneath her image appeared in white letters. Caroline Trump. Gasps rolled through the room like a slow-moving wave. Even those who had been expecting something powerful weren't ready for the weight of seeing her there, alive, present, looking straight into the lens as though staring down each person in the chamber. Her voice began low, unsteady at first, but clear enough to leave no room for doubt. "I was hidden," she said. Her breath caught, and in the pause, the rain outside seemed to fill the space between her words. "Erased," she continued, the syllables sharp despite the softness of her tone, "because my existence was inconvenient." The final word lingered like a blade in the air, too delicate to shatter, too dangerous to ignore. A single tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light before vanishing into shadow. But her gaze did not falter. It was the look of someone who had learned, through the hard arithmetic of survival, that showing fear only fed the people who wanted to erase you. Trump shifted in his chair. It wasn't much, just a shift. But in a room so taut with attention, it felt like the movement of a fault line. Caroline continued, her tone gathering a quiet momentum. "They told me my life would be easier if no one knew who I was, that I'd be safer if I didn't exist on paper." She blinked, the tear tracks glistening on her skin. "But safer for who?" Her voice didn't rise in anger, but it cut just the same. "I grew up with whispers instead of answers, closed doors instead of family, shadows instead of truth." A murmur rippled through the gallery, soft but unmissable, people leaning toward each other, some shaking their heads, others clutching their notes as though they'd just been given the missing thread in a tangled case. The camera on Caroline's end drew closer, or perhaps she leaned in. Either way, her eyes now filled the frame. "I'm not here because I want revenge," she said, and her lips pressed together for a moment before she added, "I'm here because I refuse to disappear." It was a statement, not a plea, not an accusation that begged for confirmation, but a fact that demanded recognition. The storm outside pounded harder, rain hammering the stone like a drumbeat to her words. Inside, no one coughed, no one moved, no one dared to break the fragile bridge of her voice, reaching across time and silence to this room. April Johnson's pen hovered over her notebook, frozen mid-sentence. Karen Ellis's hands, clasped together on the table, tightened until her knuckles whitened. And Jasmine, still seated, still composed, let her eyes rest on Caroline's image, her own expression a mirror of the young woman's defiance. Caroline's final words were quieter than the rest, but they landed with the precision of a hammer strike. "My life is not an inconvenience. It never was." The screen froze on her face, the tear still visible, but her gaze unwavering. The image hung there, bright against the dark wood and muted colors of the chamber, demanding to be seen, demanding to be remembered. Jasmine reached forward, pausing with her finger above the remote. She didn't look at Trump yet. She let the weight of that face, that voice, that declaration, settle over the room like a new kind of weather, one that no storm outside could wash away. Then Jasmine rose. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, as if each inch of height she gained carried its own gravity. Her hands rested on the table for a brief moment, grounding herself in the center of that charged space. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but carried to every corner of the chamber. "This is not about politics." She let the words hang, testing their resonance in the thick air. "This," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, pausing on faces that avoided hers and those that held it, "is about the line between power and humanity." The statement was not a rebuke, not an appeal. It was a verdict. And like any verdict worth remembering, it did not leave room for rebuttal. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of rain against stone, a relentless percussion that seemed to underline her words. Then slowly, half the room rose to their feet. The sound of hands meeting in applause began softly, a ripple rather than a wave, but it spread, gathering force, filling the chamber with a sound that was less celebration than affirmation. The other half remained seated. Some leaned back, arms crossed, their silence as deliberate as the applause was loud. But even in their stillness, they could not escape the fact that the balance in the room had shifted. Trump sat motionless, eyes fixed on Jasmine, as if trying to read the ending before it was written. She did not give him that satisfaction. Instead, she gathered the black envelope from the table, the wax seal unbroken, and turned toward the exit. The cameras followed her, Steadicam operators moving in tight, catching the set of her jaw, the way her grip on the envelope tightened as she passed each row. She reached the heavy double doors, and the moment they swung open, the storm outside surged in like a living thing. Wind curling around her, rain slicing through the gap to dampen the threshold. She stepped out without hesitation. The rain hit her instantly, flattening her hair against her face, soaking into her jacket, plastering the fabric to her shoulders. The black envelope remained in her right hand, its surface glistening under the assault, the red wax seal catching what little light the storm allowed. The crowd outside, still thick despite the downpour, parted just enough to let her through. They didn't cheer, didn't chant. They simply watched, the same way people watch a ship pass through a narrow channel, knowing it carries something too important to lose sight of. Jasmine moved through them without a word, the rain blurring her into the same landscape as the rest of them, erasing the line between leader and witness, between the one who spoke and those who listened. She reached the steps, paused for the briefest second, and looked out toward the street where the water ran in fast, dark currents, carrying leaves, paper, and the faint red ink of protest signs. Somewhere behind her, a reporter shouted a question, but the wind tore it away before it could reach her fully. She descended the steps slowly, the black envelope still in hand, every step a punctuation mark in a sentence that had begun long before today and would not end here. At the edge of the crowd, she stopped. She lifted her head, not toward the cameras but toward the gray, roiling sky. Rain slid down her face, mingling with something warmer, though her expression never wavered. In that moment, she was both entirely alone and impossibly connected to the thousands watching, here, in the streets and across the country. The broadcast didn't cut to commentary. It stayed with her, framed against the storm, the black envelope a stark shadow in her hand. And then came the voiceover, measured, deliberate, the kind of voice that felt carved out of stone and wind. Truth waits, but it never dies. The shot lingered for one beat longer, rain still lashing at her as she turned and walked into the blur of the storm. Then the screen faded to black. In the end, it was never just about secrets or the power to hide them. It was about the quiet, unshakable truth that every life, no matter how inconvenient to the powerful, has worth, and that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of violence. We are measured not by the titles we hold or the wealth we keep, but by the courage we summon when the cost of doing right feels too high. ChatGPT said, "If this story made you feel the weight of what's at stake, don't turn away. Hold it, share it, speak it aloud. Like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes that every life, no matter how inconvenient, deserves to be seen." Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where power is questioned and silence is never an option. Hit the bell, because the next truth isn't safe. It's unfiltered, and it might change the way you see those who lead. This is a fictional dramatization, born from real injustices and real acts of courage. Any resemblance to actual people or events is either coincidental or a mirror for public reflection. Thank you for watching. Justice isn't found, it's fought for. This is Harrison Stories,